Okay, so we've reached the final session of the day. What I'm going to do is just have a conversation with Henry and ask him some of the questions that have come up, having sort of spoken to Henry about the evolution of Bountiful Cow. But it'd be really great if you could think of your own questions, and we'll come to open it up to the floor in a little while. But firstly, thank you for giving a really honest and insightful overview of the challenges of launching Bountiful Cow, and also sharing with us some fantastic examples of how you can use news brands, the strength of news brands, to bring to life some fabulous campaigns. So first question, the theme of today is obviously all around evolution, and we've heard from Sophie and Chris and Kat this morning about how their news brands have evolved in this increasingly digitised world. What one thing stands out to you about the evolution of news brands?
It's their ability to get their shit together, to be honest. I mean, like, if you take that News UK example, if we'd briefed that 18 months ago, it would have been a nightmare. Because all these companies, whichever way you look at it, whether it's with Mirror Group or with any of the other publishers, claim that they can pull all their different assets together, but when actually you brief them and try and work with them, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I saw this industry had evolved enough to actually deliver on a brief of that sort of magnitude, with all the different touch points working together. Mm-hmm. So it's for and also, you know, that, and I guess it's easy with a charity because it's got a load of content and stuff that's relevant to the editorial, but in that instance, all the doors open to the editorial side of the businesses, the content-led side of the businesses, that is always going to add value to an advertiser. For me, that's the biggest evolution. Yeah, and great to see that you recognise the benefit in cross-platform and content partnerships. Were there any challenges other than what you've talked about already in terms of getting that live throughout the planning process, but also the implementation of that? And is there anything that the industry can be doing better to make that easier for agencies and planners to bring those campaigns to life? You have to spend time on it. Look, we've been lucky because I think we probably spent 6 months of these 10 months without any clients. That's what happens when you set up an agency. So we were able to give the time to that brief that we could, and we've locked away the time for that brief because I know the most important thing for us as an agency is to do work that works. Mm-hmm. So the single thing is, I think when you've got that nugget, is to lock away the time and spend the time with the media owners and force them to actually work with you as much as you need to work with them. And there's partnerships, and then there's real partnerships. And yeah. I also think in that, you know, we haven't done the next 2 weeks of the real hard work in this thing, because you can imagine there's 15 different bits and pieces flying around every single day. So it needs time, and it needs care, and it needs dedication.
So I suppose that collaboration piece between agency, client and the news brand is really, really important. Yeah. Just on the area of trust, so you talked quite a bit about the values of Bountiful Cow being authentic and, you know, trust being very important to you. How does this translate in terms of the way your teams approach commerce planning and make choices around or recommendations around media investment?
It's totally. So I'll tell you one story. So when we got appointed by Lily's Kitchen, who were our first client, if you have proper impartiality and trust at the heart of an organisation, it totally changes the conversation you have with that client. Mm-hmm. So we pitched for Lily's Kitchen. You went through that standard contractual sort of negotiation. You know, so they asked how much we were going to charge, and I said, I'm going to charge this much. And then I actually bricked it because I had no rebates. I had no other hidden margin that I could move in that negotiation with that client. So you're instantly placing trust into the relationship before you even actually start working together. And I think Lily's Kitchen is an exception, but they immediately signed up to the fee that we were charging them. They then called me in and said, Henry, we're not paying you enough, and actually we want more of these people's time. And then really interesting, when we sat down with the other agencies who were working on that client, because we had agreed a pure fee approach to working with them, and because it was geared to their business growth, which wherever it went, there was a conversation about, well, who's going to do social media and who's going to do the digital performance work. At that time, I had 2 people. In my old world, I would have jumped up and going, me, I can do it because I can make revenue. In the new world, it was, no, you guys do it because you're going to be better at doing it. And if you get to that number, I get paid a 50% bonus. That's a really interesting way of working, and that places trust right at the heart of the relationship. And then there is never any question after that from the client about the reason why you've put X or Y on a media plan.
Mm-hmm. I suppose because you've got skin in the game in that instance. And yeah. So back to the digital world, and we know that the digital world is increasingly complex, and it's riddled with challenges for brands and agencies alike. Because of things such as brand safety, viewability, fraud. These things are constantly being talked about and have been for a number of months. It only came to light last week that the Financial Times have discovered large-scale domain spoofing, and what we mean by that is bogus sites masquerading as being the ft.com and selling inventory on those sites. And I think the FT have estimated the value of this fraudulent activity to be around £1 million a month. So it's huge, it's significant. How do you help your clients, I suppose, combat this fraud and help them make the right decisions about where their money goes? Because obviously, given that your clients own their businesses in the main, they want to know that every penny is counting.
Yeah, look, it's a really tough one because it happens. The reality is that we encourage our clients to put all the strongest measures into the viewability tracking systems that they use across all of their different channels in place, so that they know that they have the greatest chance of reaching a human and actually the ads being seen. Above and beyond that, there's not a huge amount you can do, really, at the end of it. I think, on the performance side of our business, we haven't really talked about very much. So we work with ClearScore, who are in this space and are massively orientated around their CPAs and driving numbers. When you put a campaign out for a client in that sort of transparent position, if it's not working quite quickly. And you need to put your hand up and say that it's not working. And it may not be working because it's not being exposed to humans and there's fraud and other bits and pieces behind it. But it goes back to the quality of the partnership and the trust at the centre of the relationship that allows you to quickly put your hand up and go, well, we're turning this off, this isn't working, despite the fact that it could be at the risk of the income to the agency. Yeah.
So we have done quite a lot of work in the past with a gentleman called Peter Field, who is you all be aware of him. He's an expert in marketing effectiveness. And we've worked with him on the benefits of making sure that, understand the benefits of clients getting the right balance between marketing investment into long-term business metrics and short-term business metrics. You mentioned it a little bit when you were talking earlier. But how do you make sure, and you mentioned that a number of your clients take the short-term stuff in-house. How do you make sure that you get the right balance between the investment into the long term and the short term to make sure that brands are growing?
Yeah. So there's two sides to that. One, I think the most interesting one we've seen, which is in Sky Bet, which is basically around, if you take a business like Sky Bet, and those of you that work in the bookie space will see this all the time. Those businesses are split between the short and long term, physically. So they have an amazing digital team who are running all of their stuff in-house, completely familiar with what they're doing and can point at a very specific CPA for a new acquisition or increase in share of wallet, or whatever the measure may be. And then on the other side, you have brand who are desperately trying to do something that's innovative and different that drives the upper funnel, for one different phrase, desire for that business against which the performance can then actually work more effectively. But what you see in those businesses is they fight against each other all the time, because one is a clear measure and a direct response measure of the work that they're doing, and the other one is a bit of a softer measure around awareness or consideration or whatever other brand metrics that they're looking at. What's happened with Sky Bet is that they've actually understood the power of having a creative idea in the middle of their business that lives and breathes across the paid, owned and earned, that does both those things. And actually, the business itself has changed its structure and the way that it works to actually make those ideas come to life. So you get the short and the long-term balance in virtually every single brief that comes out of them. And that's a big example of structural change that I think a grown-up business has made around it. Going back to the other smaller brands, it's interesting. The short versus long-term is a sort of it's a very short term. So ClearScore is another great example of it. They have had amazing CPAs, but then they suddenly start to drop off. And they turn around and go, can you help? And you go, we can help, but it isn't about buying cheaper TV or optimizing your schedules anymore. It's about how you grow your brand and your desire. And that takes time for them to learn that, because they've always started from I need a £3 CPA or whatever else it might be. So you've got to balance that with them. Yeah,
and I suppose with the pressure from investors potentially, there's an increased pressure to deliver a more immediate return. Yeah. So talking about the clients that you've talked about today, there's been lots of discussion around brands that haven't necessarily got millions of pounds to spend on media, and so they do need to make every penny count. Yeah. How do you make sure that you maximise outcomes for your clients when they're in a similar situation?
Care.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really simple. It's like Lily's Kitchen, it was the first time they ever spent anything in the offline space. And it's their money, and they've spent 6 years sort of building up this pot of money to then go and spend in above the line. And it takes a load of hand-holding, it takes a load of education to go, look, it's okay, this is going to be viewed by humans, and it is going to be in the right context, and it is going to say the right thing about the brand, and it is going to drive sales for you. And I am talking probably about a small set of clients here, but it is absolutely around that trust and hand-holding that helps them get into that space to then see the accountability. I think the trick that we've got into is that most of those businesses are in a fast growth curve anyway. So all we're doing is building growth on growth. We're not trying to stop a decline or manage decline or eke another 1 or 2% market share. So we're sort of moving with the growth of those businesses as we turn on these channels, which is probably to our advantage.
Thank you. So sort of going right to the beginning of your presentation, you talked about how Bad for Cow really wanted to come in and disrupt and evolve the agency model and really value the likes of trust and transparency and real having passion in what you do. Do you feel like the industry needs to follow the lead, given all the questions raised around trust and lack of transparency and that eroding the relationships between agencies and clients?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I've chosen my words really carefully, this isn't a dig on the individuals that work in the agencies. We've worked with some amazing people in those organisations, and they do fantastic jobs, and they care about their business, and they have passion for those clients. Our concern is how the machine changes to do what it should be doing, and how it uncouples itself from a position of frankly, where you know that your biggest revenue generators aren't directly from the clients' fees that they're paying, and how you unpick that without undermining the trust. And I think sadly, and I don't mean it in every case, but I think sadly, there are instances where you can turn around to a client and go, look, I've been making this much money out of you, but I've been doing this fantastic work over here. And actually that conversation is a relatively easy conversation, but I fear it may be relatively rare compared to how the agency world is generating its revenue as it sits at the moment. So it's got to lead. Not everyone's going to do it, and I think some of the really interesting pushbacks we got when we set up was that, Henry, clients don't give a shit, to be honest. The big clients, they don't want to accept the need for change or accept that they may have actually been, paying much more for their agency services than they were aware of. They don't want to accept that in front of the board and make that change. And I think there will be an element of that, but that's not where we're operating. We're not after a P&G or a Unilever. We're after those types of businesses that are going to tell great stories about us.
Yeah. Any more questions from the floor? I've got one more question.
Just on that thing.
Yeah.
So it's fast forward 5 years.
Yeah. What am I going to do?
900 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you going to be able to maintain those core values?
So there's a few things that we're putting in place. And it's all going to be about the people that you bring in. It always is, because there's a team of 6 people. I can manage that really easily and understand how they work and operate. But there's a couple of principles that we're putting in place that I think will make a difference. So most of the big networks work on a head count to income ratio of around 30 to 40%. and everything gets worked into that type of number. We won't pay any attention to that because actually we'll probably work at a higher ratio in order to deliver the better work. So our margins won't be as big as what I may have seen previously. So, but the business will probably be bigger in a headcount perspective because of that. But I'd like to think we're doing better work. The other bit is, and you know when you do it, when you're pitching for new business and you win a piece of new business and you lock someone in on 40% of their share of their time, yet you know you've allocated 180% of their time on other clients. We will never do that. So when I get to 100, 120% capacity on an individual, we will then recruit and build out the team accordingly, because you have to deliver that authenticity and honesty at the heart of the relationship. So I hope those two things will help, but it's totally about the culture, it's totally about the clients. And also, I think the other really important thing is you have to choose the right clients to work with. If you get one client that comes in that takes a piss, doesn't pay you a PRF because they haven't budgeted for it or behaves in that type of way, then you may as well, give up. So there's a real, I'm very aware there's a romanticism that sits in the heart of my business model at the moment, but I really want to try and keep that as it grows into a bigger organisation.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today, Henry. One more question before we go. Yeah. If you had one piece of advice for these lovely people in the room on how you could maximise the effectiveness of news brands, what would that be?
Take time.
Take time.
Yeah.
Good advice. Thank you very much.